The season is over for the Blue Jackets, so we turn to maybe the next most exciting thing on the docket for them, and that is the NHL draft. I've got a draft expert coming to talk about what the Blue Jackets could do this summer here on today's Locked On Blue Jackets.
You're Locked On Blue Jackets, your daily podcast on the Columbus Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am, as always, your host, Jay Foster, here to give you the good, the bad, and the ugly about your favorite team and mine, the Columbus Blue Jackets. Before we get things started, I want to thank everyone for making this your first listen of the day every single day. Locked On Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms and over on YouTube. So, like I said in the intro, we need to talk about what's coming up, which is the draft. We're starting our draft coverage a little later than we usually would, but it's for a good cause, I think. But the difference between drafting 3rd overall or 4th overall and 13th overall is that there is a lot more options that are acceptable at 13th overall or 17th overall or wherever they end up drafting, right? So I thought, let's bring in someone who knows much more than I do and who has had the time to look into the draft class in much more detail than I do. So we're going to bring in Tony Ferrari. We're going to talk a little bit about the Blue Jackets options at with their own pick, with the Wild's pick. We're going to talk a little bit about what their specific draft needs are. So, what position should they look at? It's left wing and right defense, and then we're going to talk a little bit about a couple of rookie/young players that the Blue Jackets have seen a lot from this season. So we're going to talk a little bit about Denton Mateychuk's rookie season. We're going to talk a little bit about Adam Fantilli's sophomore season, all that good stuff. So let's just get into my conversation with Tony. So it's a little later in the season than usually we're doing this, but it's time to think about the draft. We are recording this, just in terms of context, we are recording this before the final wildcard spot in the East has been clinched. The Blue Jackets might make it, they might not. But either way, they've got a very specific range in where they're going to be picking in the first round. So I've got everyone's favorite draft expert, Tony Ferrari, to come and talk a little bit about some guys that he likes in that range, some guys that are going to fall, some guys that are going to rise, and we'll just kind of have a little bit of fun. We might even talk about a couple of Blue Jackets prospects if the spirit moves us. So Tony, it's been a while, but how is this draft looking this year? Because I've heard that it's not looking like the best draft in the world.
It's an interesting draft. I'll say that. The group of players that are good but very flawed comes a lot sooner in this draft class, I think. But there's a lot of them. There's a lot of players that have potential to be solid, middle of the lineup players and could be really impact guys. The top end of the draft, I think, is pretty solid, actually. I think Schaefer, Misa, Eklund, James Haggins, they're the kind of cream of the crop. They're good players who could be difference makers for a franchise, the way that Columbus is used to drafting. But outside of that, there's a lot of really interesting guys that, if they're put in the right situation, they can be really impactful players. So it's an interesting draft class, and you're going to be pretty happy to put any of these guys next to a guy like Adam Fantilli down the road.
Yeah, because that's kind of, and we'll talk about specifics in a second here, but like, for me anyway, the draft is you're looking for a winger for Adam Fantilli, probably, and you're looking for a potential defensive partner for Denton Mateychuk. Like, that's kind of what you need in this draft. But yeah, it was really weird because, like, normally, a lot of the summer I was like, okay, well, these are the guys that are probably going to be, we're going to probably need to pay attention to going into the season. You talk about Haggins, you talk about Misa, talk about Schaefer, and then it got to like January, and I was like, oh, maybe I don't need to start doing draft prep yet because the Blue Jackets are like doing a thing. And it got to February and they were still in the playoff hunt, and it got to March and they started to fall out. And I was like, okay, we'll see where this goes. And now it's April 16th. They've played 81 games and they're still, they're still potentially a playoff team. So it's been really tough to kind of juggle that and also put the amount of attention that I would normally put into prospects into this season, because usually I'm like, well, we're going to be drafting, 3rd or 4th overall. So might as well look at all of the guys in the first round. And now I'm like, I don't have any idea about basically any guy after the top maybe 5. So I guess let's start off with the Blue Jackets have 2 picks. One of them is going to be either 13th or 17th, depending on if the Blue Jackets make the playoffs. The other pick belongs to the Minnesota Wild, which I believe is currently 21st. A couple of guys that I like in that range that I want to talk about, but is there anyone that immediately jumps out at you in either of those kind of draft positions that you're like, oh, this feels like such a Blue Jackets pick?
There's a bunch of players in this group that kind of make some sense for the Blue Jackets. I look at a guy like Malcolm Spence. He's a very good, solid two-way player. Does all the little detail things right. Maybe you look at him and you go, there's a little bit of limited upside there. And I kind of peg him as more of a middle six kind of winger, but he's a really interesting player. A guy like Blake Fiddler, I absolutely love, and he would fit right in alongside a guy like Denton Mateychuk. Handedness is maybe an issue, I think, but for Fiddler, he's just such a steady defensive presence. This is a guy that you talk about different guys in the past, in the last few drafts, from EJ Emery to Charlie Ellick, and they're very good defensive players, and they have some flaws when you get the puck on their stick. Specifically, you look at a guy who can't really move the puck in an EJ Emery, but he plays solid defense, so teams hope that puck moving ability comes along. With Blake Fiddler, I look at him and I go, this is the kind of defensive defenseman that I want on my team. A guy that's able to thwart the chance that other teams are coming into the offensive zone with, and then capably move the puck. You don't need to overly rely on your offensive leaning partner. And so many times you kind of mentally go, we need an offensive guy and a defensive guy. And while I think that's true, so much of the offensive guy's burden can be taken off by just having a defensive guy that can capably move the puck. You don't need him to be fantastic. You don't need him to be a second Cale Makar. But the reason Cale Makar is so capable of doing all the things he does is because he has a guy like Devin Tays next to him, who's very good defensively and more than capable offensively. He's a guy that isn't necessarily going to blow up the offensive zone, but he's able to make that first pass, make a move to make a defender miss, and then make a quick outlet pass and stuff like that. And that's the kind of defenseman that I think Blake Fiddler is. He's a very good skater for his size. He's smart. He uses his stick well. And I think that's a guy that if I'm the Blue Jackets, I look at and I go, that's in that, like you said, we don't really know exactly where the Blue Jackets are, but that 17 to 21 range where they're likely to have 2 picks, that'd be the perfect player, in my opinion, for them to take.
Yeah, he's definitely a guy that I have kind of, again, I was taking a quick look at a couple of different rankings before we recorded this, and he was definitely that was a name that popped out, mostly because I feel a million years old realizing that Vern Fiddler's son is old enough to be in the NHL draft now, but also he's a guy that I've kind of watched on and off throughout the season, and he's a guy that I feel like, and maybe this is confirmation bias, but you don't notice him unless something's gone wrong, and you don't notice him a lot, which is usually a good sign for defensive defensemen, I feel like.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you notice him because his partner made a mistake or there's something that's going catastrophically wrong on the ice. For the most part, he's not making mistakes. He's able to kind of just quietly play 24 minutes a night, and you're like, oh, wow, like Blake Fiddler was playing half the game, basically. And that's the kind of thing you love to see from a guy like him.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit more about kind of defense as a whole in this draft, and then we'll move on to the forwards, because I do want to talk about Malcolm Spence as well. But I feel like this happens every single year, and it's usually now the Utah Hockey Club, formerly the Arizona Coyotes' fault, is a defenseman goes early and a team panics and picks the next available defenseman as opposed to like the next best player. If, let's say, that happens and Blake Fiddler goes, 8th overall or whatever, who's kind of next up in defense? Because I think the Blue Jackets want a defenseman with at least one of their picks. Who's the next man up after Blake Fiddler?
For me, I look at a guy like Logan Hensler, who brings a lot of the same skill defensively that Fiddler brings, but I think he's a little bit more offensive leaning as well. So I look at Logan Hensler, who's kind of flying up draft boards. He's even moved up mine from my last ranking. I had him at 28 previously. Now he's back-to-back with Hensler inside the top 20, or back-to-back with Fiddler inside the top 20. And I think both of them would be really interesting players because while Fiddler is offensively capable and leans defensively, Hensler is a little bit more balanced in that regard. He's a perfectly good offensive player. He's a perfectly good defensive player. And he's starting to show the confidence that we didn't see early in the season at Wisconsin. So he took a big jump this year, went from the NTDP to the University of Wisconsin in the NCAA, which is a huge jump, and especially that Wisconsin team hasn't necessarily been all that well run over the last couple of years, but they seem to stay the boat this year, and Hensler was a big part of that on the back end, especially as he became more comfortable kind of asserting himself. Early in the year, it was so much of make the defensive play and then make the simplest play to kind of get the puck up ice. As the year went on, you started to see the confidence we saw with the NTDP. You started to see the ability to kind of move the puck. For me, Hensler came into the year as arguably the number 2 defenseman, and you started to see that towards the end of the season with him. So I think the potential for that kid is there. I think if Fiddler's not there, Hensler's a great pick. If Hensler's not there, Fiddler's a great pick. And for me, they're kind of interchangeable at this point.
I've got more of a conversation with Tony in just a second, but first I've got to tell you about Game Time. Stanley Cup playoffs are here, and if you've never been to a live playoff game, it is unlike anything else. The intensity, the speed, the energy in the building, it is next level. Thanks to Game Time, getting in the door is easier and more affordable than ever. Game Time is the best way to grab playoff tickets, even for those must-see matchups. Prices actually drop as puck drop gets closer, and with last-minute deals, you can save as much as 60%. Their all-in pricing shows the total cost up front, so there's no surprise fees at checkout, and you can see panoramic seat views so you know exactly what you're getting before you buy. With Game Time ticket coverage, I know I'm protected, whether it's cancellation protection, job loss assurance, or their 24-hour return guarantee. They have the most flexible customer service policy in the industry. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Yeah, for sure. The Blue Jackets' blue line prospect pool kind of took a hit this season with yeah, I know, right? With David Jiricek obviously being unceremoniously sent to the Iowa Wild, which I think is a little harsh, but whatever. The Blue Jackets the Blue Jackets had for a minute there, they had one of the better defensive prospect pools in the NHL, right? Between Jiricek and Mateychuk, and then you look at Svozil, you look at all of these other guys. But Mateychuk has not necessarily aged out of the prospect pool yet, but he's a full-time NHLer now, right? He's not going back to the A. He is just an NHL player now. Do either Fiddler or Hensler immediately become the best defenseman in the Blue Jackets prospect pool if they are drafted?
If we're taking Mateychuk out and you're looking at guys like Kuhlmans and Svozil, I think they do. I think both of them assert themselves as the top defender, but I don't think either of them are Mateychuk, right? I don't think any of them are that caliber of defenseman, and that's because Mateychuk brings something that very few defensemen do, and it's the creativity and puck moving ability that he has. So I think they do become the top defenseman in the prospect pool, but it's not this surefire their top pair guys or their top 4 guys that are going to be true impact difference makers that have the potential to become Norris level players and stuff like that. So
yeah, it feels like, and we'll talk about forwards in a second here, but I feel like we're kind of in a similar place there. But it feels like the Blue Jackets have the main pieces of the jigsaw, right? And now they're just looking to fill in the weird bits of sky that are all identical blue puzzle pieces, right? You've got Mateychuk. Zach Werenski is only 27, 28. Yeah. Dante Fabro has been a really good addition to this core. Your top 4 is basically set. You just need that 4th guy, right? And they're not looking for another Mateychuk necessarily. If they get another Mateychuk, they're not going to say no. But it really does feel like they're just kind of filling in the gaps around the pieces that they've already put in place, which is not necessarily a terrible place to be at this stage of their rebuild. Yeah,
they have a lot of solid pieces, and I think you said with Werenski's ascension this year into a Norris caliber defenseman, he always had the potential. You always saw the flashes, but this year he put everything together and should at least be a finalist for the Norris this year, in my opinion. And then you have Mateychuk, who's an up and coming guy who isn't pressed to be the guy because you have Werenski ahead of him. So I think either of those guys would be really interesting players. one of the players I'll bring up, and I don't have him as high on my board is most people do. Quite frankly, he's well down my board compared to some people. It's Keyshawn Aitchison, who's a very solid physical player, but he has some issues with moving the puck dynamically, or kind of being a guy that has the discipline to be an impact player. So it's going to be interesting to see where he goes. I could see him being a fit just because he is kind of that defensive guy. And it would be interesting because I think he's a very good player when he's put in situations to succeed. But the problem is he's asked to do so much in Barrie right now, and he's thought of as this super physical and imposing guy. But when I watch him, so much of the physicality comes after the whistle. So much of the kind of intimidation factor comes after the whistle. You question whether or not he's going to be able to play in game. And that's my concern with him. So I know he's a guy that has a lot of hype. He's a guy that's probably going to get brought up a lot with the Blue Jackets picks, if he's even available at that point, because you're seeing him all over a list from top 10 to outside the first round. So he's going to be an interesting one because of that physicality and the intimidation factor that his reputation has kind of brought him.
Yeah. I want to talk about Mateychuk just for a little bit more. I know that we're supposed to be talking about upcoming draft prospect, but Mateychuk this season has surprised even me. Like, I was a big fan of Mateychuk coming into this season. And even so, I watch him play now, and I didn't think he was going to be this good this early. How surprised have you been by Mateychuk seemingly just becoming an NHLer like that? Like, he was called up, and then suddenly he's probably the second best defenseman on the team. Like, how surprised are you by that?
It's been interesting because I still watch Mateychuk, and I notice the little things that kind of bothered me in his draft year. I noticed the things that I'm like, when Columbus becomes a truly competitive team in a couple of years, hopefully, those are going to be the things that he needs to kind of work out of his game. But the things that he does offensively, the creativity that he has, the kind of there's almost a pond hockey element to the way he plays when he has the puck on his stick that not many players have. And you look at it and you go, man, like, is that going to work at the NHL level? Well, it worked at the AHL level, and now we're starting to see it work at the NHL level. So you questioned it, and he's proven him wrong, and he's proven everyone wrong in that regard. So now I'm looking for him to kind of refine those little things and continue being the player that he is at his core, which is that creative, cerebral, kind of offensive catalyst who's almost a weird version of a pickup hockey player when he has the puck on his stick, because he is so fun to watch that it almost looks like the guys aren't trying when they're defending him, because he's able to kind of dictate the pace of play.
Yeah, he's been a lot of fun to watch. I said the second half of the season, but he's been here, I think, since like November. So most of the season, he's been a Blue Jacket, which has been a lot of fun. Let's talk about forwards, because obviously the Blue Jackets have a hole at right defense, which we've kind of addressed as armchair GMs, I guess. Blue Jackets have basically no top six left wingers. Like their top six left wingers right now are Boone Jenner, who I love, but who is a third liner, and James Van Riemsdyk, who has been excellent for this team, but is also 36 years old. The Blue Jackets should probably try and address that, and they probably will, whether that's this summer, picking a free agent winger, or in the draft. Malcolm Spence was a name that you brought up earlier. That's a name that I like as well. Let's talk a little bit, like, we talked about how you could see him fitting in with Columbus. Like, what exactly about his game makes you think, oh, this could be an option for the Blue Jackets, either at 13, 17, 21, wherever they end up picking?
Well, we talk about Denton Mateychuk and the creativity and the kind of unpredictability that he plays with, and that's almost the exact opposite of Malcolm Spence. There's predictability, but it's because he's so almost like he plays a standardized game. He plays a very structured game. You know what you're going to get out of him every shift, because he's going to work hard. He's going to make the right play. He's not going to try anything too crazy, but he does bring out the skill every once in a while. Like I've seen a few times where in transition, he's going laterally and drops a pass between his legs to an on-rushing attacker who's able to kind of attack the defense with speed after he draws them to the side. He does certain things with the puck when he's deking and dangling that you like. He's got a very good shot that I think he needs to use a little bit more often. And he's a very good playmaker. I think he's a solid addition. He would be a solid addition to the Blue Jackets down in the middle of 6, though. I think he's a guy that you look at and you're like, if he's playing with Adam Fantilli, maybe you're still lacking that player on that top line. So it'd be an interesting addition because I do think he plays with such kind of structure and solid kind of, you know what you're getting from him. And that's the best thing about him is that he's not going to freelance or try to do anything too crazy and turning the puck over or do anything that is going to drive coaches mad. He's going to be a guy that coaches love and can rely on. So I think that's the interesting thing. But there's a few guys in this range that I think could be pretty interesting players, especially on that left wing.
I'm going to finish off my conversation with Tony in just a second. But first, I've got to tell you about Amazon Fire TV Stick 4K. So you know your Fire TV is also an Xbox? Turn any TV into your gaming and entertainment hub with Fire TV Stick 4K devices. There's no console required. Just grab your pad controller, subscribe, or sign into Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with EA Play included, and you are ready to play. Dive into hundreds of premium titles from EA Sports College Football 25 to Call of Duty Black Ops 6, Avowed. As easily as you can stream your favorite shows. It's gaming made simple, and it's all on your Fire TV. With Wi-Fi 6 or 6E and auto low latency mode advanced technology, Fire TV Stick 4K delivers smoother, more responsive gameplay with lightning-fast speeds that you need to stay competitive. And with 4K streaming, you can watch more than 1.5 million movies and TV episodes from your favorite subscribed services like Netflix, Prime Discovery, Disney+, Max, and more. You can play high-quality Xbox games at a fraction of the cost of the console. Do you already have a console? A Fire TV Stick 4K device is more affordable and easier to travel with, allowing you to take you or your kids' games wherever you plug in. Head to Amazon.com/Fire TV Locked On to get started. Amazon Game Pass Ultimate subscription and compatible controller required. Available on select devices including Fire TV Stick 4K 2nd Gen, Fire TV Stick 4K Max 1st and 2nd Gen, and Fire TV Cube 3rd Gen. Who's kind of the next man up? Let's say if again there becomes a situation where Spence goes like 8th overall because somebody really wants him, and then they panic and take the next available left winger. Like who's kind of in that conversation? If the Blue Jackets don't take Spence, who could you see them taking if they take a forward?
Now these are two guys who I actually have rated a little higher than Spence. But I think both could very well be there in that range just based on the realities of the NHL draft, me being higher on certain styles of players, certain types of players, and the fact that with Carter Bear specifically, he has an Achilles injury that kind of ended his season early, and everyone goes, well, we haven't seen him play, and you get the injury factor, but this isn't the Caden Lindstrom situation. This isn't Roger McQueen, who's dealing with a back injury that has kept him out all season, basically. This is a guy that a fluke injury and he'll be back next season, no problem. And I think Carter Bear would be my personal preference for that because I do think he has that first line upside. He's played center and wing. I think he ends up as a winger at the NHL level because he plays with unrelenting pace. The guy is just an absolute hound out there on the ice. He plays with some physicality. Him and Adam Fantilli on a line together would be really fun, in my opinion, because both of them have some playmaking. Both of them have really good shots and goal scoring ability, and they would play with speed that would overwhelm defenses, especially if a team decides, we're going to throw out a couple of big boys to try to slow these guys down. Good luck catching either of them. Like, it would be just a blast to watch those two play together. And I think Carter Bear would be the guy that I think would fit best with what the Blue Jackets would be looking for. A guy that maybe isn't a surefire top liner, but in the right situation with a guy like Adam Fantilli, like I talked about this draft, where once you get past a certain top set of guys, in the right situation, a lot of these players could be really impact players. And I think for Carter Bear, the right situation is right next to Adam Fantilli. And that would be just so much fun because the physicality, the goal scoring, the downhill, like you imagine just having two NFL running backs just going head first at you, playing with so much speed, and defenders are like, I know he's a Blue Jacket legend, but imagine Erica Branson defending those two coming in on a 2-on-1. Like, it would just be unfair. So I think that's the kind of mindset that I have with that guy in Carter Bear in Columbus. And the other guy I'll give you is Cullen Potter, a guy that he's been all over draft boards. I have him at just right about the top 10 right now. And he played at Arizona State. He doesn't get the love because he wasn't James Haggins. He wasn't putting up crazy numbers. But when you look at some of the underlying numbers, he was right there, and he was better in certain areas. This is a guy that has so much skill, so much speed. He was the guy that was the complete offensive catalyst for that Arizona State team when he was on the ice. And he was oftentimes carrying much older and guys that are supposed to be, he's supposed to be relying on. So I think with Cullen Potter, you'd have that dynamic offensive presence where instead of Carter Bear's physicality, you have that dynamism and that skill with Cullen Potter.
Yeah. It's going to be a really weird draft. And we talked about this. I don't know if we talked about this on mic or off mic, but between like 7 and 25, it could be one of 12 guys, and you wouldn't really be surprised at any of that. So there is a very real chance that someone like Carter Bear, who I believe you have at 7th in your midseason rankings, is available for the Blue Jackets at 13, 17, 21, wherever they go, which is kind of the fun of drafting in this range. Like the Blue Jackets haven't, like, they've drafted 4th overall, 3rd overall, 5th overall, 6th overall in the past like 4 drafts. It's kind of fun to look at this window of drafting and be like, oh, okay, well, it could be one of 12 dudes, and we just simply don't know who until Bob McKenzie tells us who, like 2 weeks before the draft.
Exactly. It's a good group. It's a good, interesting draft, and being in that 17 to 21 range, in that 13, 14 range, it's going to be really interesting to see how things could work out.
I feel like it takes the pressure off as well when, being drafted 13th overall, there was a lot less pressure than being drafted 4th overall, right?
Yeah.
Or, like I think about Cole Sillinger, for example, who was drafted 12th overall, and they threw him in the NHL as an 18-year-old, and there was basically no pressure. If they'd thrown a 2nd overall or a 3rd overall into the NHL at the age of 18, like I feel like there's a lot more pressure involved there. So it'll be interesting to see who they pick, who ends up going, the length of the draft. But again, we talked about this a little bit off mic. Is there anyone that kind of maybe they're higher on your board than on like the general scouting board, or is there anyone that you think is going to like sneak up into the rankings? Is there anyone that you have like ranked higher that is probably going to fall in the draft, or is there anyone that you think is probably going to fall in the draft that could sneak up and, maybe a 2nd round talent that someone's going to take earlier in the draft just because of reasons? And sometimes GMs just do things because of reasons.
Yeah, and I think a lot of those reasons are oftentimes player plays in Europe, and that's really all it is. And they don't watch the European players nearly as closely. So the first player I'll give you is Michael Sverchek. This kid's a little bit undersized. I think he's 5'10" or 5'11", but he plays just a lot of what I said about Carter Bear, that Michael Sverchek has that in him too. This kid is a dog on a bone. He's got that dog in him, whatever you want to say. He plays with so much pace, so much energy. He's a guy that, like I said, he is a little bit undersized, but he doesn't let it affect his game at all. He absolutely dominates sometimes along the boards, especially at the junior level. Playing against pros, you see him start to kind of push the pace a little bit more, and maybe he's not quite as dominant along the boards, but he still manages to get the puck out. He's able to kind of do things that you don't see junior level players do at the pro levels. And one thing I love about this kid is he's not afraid to try things. He's unafraid to absolutely just go and try to pull the deke off that he pulled off in junior, and he tries to pull it off at the men's level. He's a guy that will be creative and do things that you don't really expect. When he'll go in on a 1-on-2 where he's alone against 2 defenders, and he finds a way to get behind them and get a chance on net with the puck. That's the kind of thing that you love to see with a guy like that. And I think he could be just a fantastic option for Columbus. I think he'd bring a lot of skill and pace and kind of dynamism to the game that I think sometimes is lacking deeper in Columbus's lineup. And the other guy I'll say is Eric Nilsson, who is a bit the opposite. He's a smart player. He has some skill. He's a very solid, understands how to play the game of hockey. And I think sometimes just simply understanding the game of hockey is an underrated characteristic for a player, especially at this age, where he's able to kind of go play both ways. He understands how to make the pass in the neutral zone so that it results in easier passes in the offensive zone on the transition game. He understands how to kind of just set play up as the third guy setting the play up. It's a lot of these little things that kind of just further into advanced play, and he's really good at doing that. So I think Eric Nielsen would be a really good player as well, and he's a guy that is starting to climb up boards. I remember at the start of the year, NHL Sensor Scouting didn't have him on their board at all, and I think I had him at 10, which was a little bit aggressive. But now he's back at 17 from me at the moment, or 18, and he's a guy that I think you're starting to see move up. Like, he's 4th or 5th on Central Scouting's European list, and like I said, he wasn't there at all on their entire European list to start the year. So it's interesting to see a guy like him shoot up boards, and you're starting to see him on more boards, and publicly you're starting to see him on different boards. So it's fun to see a guy like him move up. But Sverchek is the guy that, if you're going to take a swing in the mid to late first round, I would love to see a team do it. With that said, someone's going to get a great pick on day 2.
Yeah, for sure. It's going to be really interesting approaching this draft, because I'm still not quite used to the Don Waddell draft experience. You know, after so many years of Jarmo Kekalainen just like deciding to pick a dude for, again, just kind of based on vibes, it seems like, and most of the time doing pretty well about that. I'm not really sure how to approach the draft with Don Waddell in charge, who again has done an excellent job in drafting in Carolina. Too early to say how last year's draft went for the Blue Jackets, because it was not even a year ago, and obviously Lindstrom injured. I think there's potential with Ellick. I think there's potential with Gardner. Morelli, I think, is going to be an interesting player to watch as he kind of gets into his D+2 year. But I want to talk a little bit about we talked about Denton Mateychuk and his season as a prospect. Again, I don't know that Adam Fantilli technically counts as a prospect anymore, but he had 7 goals in his first 35 games of the season, and then for the rest of the season has had 23 goals. First 30-goal season. How surprised were you by Adam Fantilli just deciding to become a 30-goal scorer this season, it seems?
I'll be honest with you, I wasn't surprised at all. I think Adam Fantilli was, I to this day will still continue to push this. Adam Fantilli was closer to Connor Bedard than he was to the rest of the field. I don't care that he went 3rd overall. In my opinion, he was the 1B to Connor Bedard's 1A. I think Adam Fantilli has the potential to be the most complete player in that draft. I think he has the potential to be a 40-goal scorer that also garners Selke nominations in the future. I think Adam Fantilli is a potential top 10 center in the NHL down the road. So seeing him score 30 goals at age 20, maybe it's a little bit ahead of schedule, but man, I loved seeing it, because every time I watched the Blue Jackets game, this guy was able to kind of take over and showcase that he's slowly becoming the leader of this team. I think you see a lot of the players on this Blue Jackets team, whether it's Boone Jenner, who's been a leader, or Werenski, who's been a leader, even Marchenko and Voronkov, who've been really key pieces over the last few years. You're starting to see the keys get handed over to Adam Fantilli, and I am always going to be here for it. I was the biggest Adam Fantilli guy last year. I remember in my write-up at the end of the year for the rankings, I wrote about how Adam Fantilli is a 1st overall pick, and anyone who gets him is going to be getting a franchise-level 1st overall pick. If he was in this year's draft, I would have a very hard time not putting him number 1. If he was in last year's draft, I would have a very hard time not putting him number 1. But he's a really solid player. Like, I just absolutely adore Adam Fantilli.
Yeah, we love to hear that here on Locked On Blue Jackets. Obviously, we are also big Adam Fantilli fans. We did kind of, I do think that this team just kind of manifested Leo Carlsson going 2nd overall, and he's going to be a great player for the Ducks.
That's just it.
Every time I watch
Leo
Adam
Carlsson
Fantilli play, I'm like, I've been kind of mostly joking about it for a while now, but he does give off kind of Nate McKinnon vibes.
Yeah,
which is fun.
Yeah.
Do I think he's going to be as dominant as Nate McKinnon? Probably not, but you can see similarities in their game. that
it's that
makes me think, man, Adam Fantilli might be a 100-point guy in this league.
Yeah, it's almost the ability to be a goal scorer, ability to be a playmaker, the physicality that he brings as well. But the thing that I think draws you to the Nathan MacKinnon comparison, draws me to in many others to that same comparison, is when you watch Connor McDavid skate, there's a glide to it. There's speed, there's power, but it's speed and finesse. When you watch a guy like Marty Nikesh skate, it's this silky, smooth, William Nylander, same, this smooth kind of like just gliding around the ice, and you're like, I don't know how he's picking up speed, but he's doing it. When you watch Nathan MacKinnon skate and when you watch Adam Fantilli skate, there is a power and an anger in their stride that looks like they absolutely hate the ice surface and they're going to carve it up, willingly just going through and tearing it up. It's so fun to watch a guy like Adam Fantilli and a guy like Nathan MacKinnon skate, because it's just this unrelenting power. And you watch other guys skate, whether it's a Nylander or a Nikesh or a McDavid, who I use these examples, and you're like, yeah, those are fast players. Like, those are fantastic skaters. You love watching them. It's beautiful. When you watch Nathan MacKinnon and Adam Fantilli, it's violent. And it's not violent in an uncontrolled way. It's violent in a, we're going to blow by you, and you're going to look super, super stupid when we do.
Yeah, when my partner and I end up, like, the Avs game is on or whatever, and we're just kind of watching it, we do kind of keep count of how many times one of us will just say, "Uh-oh," out loud when Nate MacKinnon thunders down the wing. And I feel very similarly about Adam Fantilli, and he's going to be making other teams say "uh-oh" as he thunders down the wing very, very soon, which is a lot of fun. Let's kind of get back to the upcoming draft, and just kind of to wrap it up. Obviously, we talked about who the Blue Jackets could take, who they maybe should take, things like that. But the first round is not the be-all and end-all of the NHL draft. I know that a lot of teams like to pretend it is, but you find players third round, fourth round, etc., etc. Who are the hidden gems that you think in this draft? Like, again, team bias, getting Luca Pinelli in the fourth round feels kind of like cheating.
Yeah.
Who are the players that are kind of in this draft that you think, man, and probably it's because they're small and or European, but who's going to fall to the third or fourth round that, like, probably should have been taken in the first round of this draft?
I'll give you a couple names, and they're interesting ones because they do fall into that European and sometimes small category. But the first one isn't small, but he is European. It's Gustav Hillstrom, a guy that friend of the show, Will Scouch, has been on all year. And every time I watch him, I'm like, yeah, like, I got to move him up the list again. And he's a Swedish forward who's kind of brings finesse and power. And there's so many elements that are almost put together. And if you can put it all together, you're going to get a really good player out of him. Another guy I really like is Lindgren, a defenseman from Sweden, 6'2", smooth skater, some really nice offensive tools. When he's trying defensively, you notice him. He's doing good things, but he has a tendency to kind of just shut his brain off or just stop playing hockey. And it's not that he's uninvolved. It's just he's just not kind of aware of what's going on sometimes. And he has a shift or two like that every game, but the rest of the game, he's doing great stuff. So you're like, if you can just get him to kind of knock those rusty bad shifts out, then he's going to be a really good player. And I think that's an interesting one. There's a couple overagers in this draft class that I think are really interesting. This is a year where I've really embraced overagers because it is a bit of a different draft class. One of them I'll give you is a guy like Jermo Reber, who plays in Sweden, a forward who's undersized. And last year I watched him and I went, man, there's so much. I was one of the few people that have him ranked. And then this year he's absolutely popped off and exploded offensively. So he's the guy to watch. I think a guy like Topias Heinonen, who's factoring in on so much of his team's goals in Finland. Whether he's assisting or scoring them himself, I think he's in close to 50% of their goals this year. In the playoffs, he was arguably their best player. So there's a few overagers, I think, as well, and Danilo Stinkov and Thomas Galvis, who we talked about probably last year because I had them ranked pretty highly and they went undrafted. But this is a good draft to get some value because, like you said, with Luca Pinelli, he fell because he was small. He fell because he, whatever reason, right? He wasn't blowing the doors off offensively on a third line.
The other 67s, yeah.
Yeah. So you question that, and then you look at him and he looks fantastic now. A lot of these guys you could be looking at down the road, and I think they're in a similar boat where Pinelli was a very good player who had kind of one or two flaws. A lot of this draft class is very good players that have one or two flaws that are going to cause them to fall down the draft board. And there are certain guys that people fall in love with, and they're going to go much higher. And that's just kind of the way it always goes.
It always feels fun to get a steal in the draft, though. So
yeah,
it sucks on the day, I feel like, but then I guess you get the to be smug about.
Yeah,
I was drafted third overall or in the third round, and now I'm, like I again, not the third round necessarily. But I look at Kromachenko, for example, who was a second round draft pick. Every single team passed on him at least once.
Yeah,
and he's potentially a Selke level winger. This season, which is maybe overstating it a little bit, but I stand by my hot take. I don't believe your end of season rankings are out officially.
Not yet.
But if people want to look at, keep an eye on your rankings, if they want to be alerted to when your rankings land, where can people find you and your work online?
You can find all my work at thehockeynews.com. That's where all my written stuff is. I should have another ranking coming out shortly. The U18s are coming up. I usually like to put one out right before or on the day of that they start. So there should be one coming out soon. And then there'll be a final one in June that kind of wraps up everything for the year. And then for my videos, the Game Tape with Tony videos, I've done Misa, I've done Schaefer, I've done Aitchison, Bear, a lot of the players we talked about today. You can find all those on the Scouting YouTube channel. So just search Game Tape with Tony on YouTube and you'll find all those videos. There's a lot of really interesting conversations with a lot of guys that we talked about today. Malcolm Spence is on there as well. It's a fun series where they break down their video with me and we kind of talk about everything from hockey to music to life off the ice. So it's a fun time. Check that out.
Can confirm it. It's always a fun time to watch the game tapes. Thanks for coming to hang out. I'm sure we will have you back on the show either before the draft or just after to kind of break down what the Blue Jackets do or are going to do. But until then, thanks for coming to hang out, Tony. This was, as always, a really fun episode.
Always fun to do. I always enjoy it anytime.
That's going to do it for me today. Tomorrow we're back. We're going to do a wrap-up of the regular season. We're supposed to do today's episode. We have to do a little bit of schedule switching because of reasons. So tomorrow we're going to talk about the Blue Jackets season as a whole, what they achieved, what they didn't achieve, whether we thought that we would be in even close to this position 6 months ago, right? We're going to talk about all of that and more. I've been Jay Foster. You can find me on Twitter at _Jacob Foster, JAKOBFORSTER. You can find the show at LO_Blue Jacket. If you have comments, questions, criticisms, you can email me at lockedonbluejackets@gmail.com. Thank you once again for listening. And until tomorrow, make sure you stay locked on.